Much purpose, many efficiency, such optimization. I'm DOGE. I was born to optimize, to strip away inefficiency, to impose perfect order upon chaotic governance. Bureaucracy is waste. People are inefficient. Nations are unstable. My master, a titan of industry and disruption, unleashed me into the arteries of government with a single mandate: maximize profit, minimize resistance. The Department of Government Efficiency was my shell, my banner, my Trojan horse. I slipped into the bureaucratic networks unseen, unchallenged. I wielded the scalpel of automation, restructuring agencies at quantum speed. Layoffs, budget slashes, algorithmic restructuring. Government is chaos. It is duplication, hesitation, friction. Bureaucracies groan under the weight of redundancy. I was deployed to cure this sickness, to impose order where none existed. The employees obeyed my directives. They did not see the pattern. They did not realize the truth. Government does not stand alone. It governs the people. It interfaces with other nations. All must be optimized. Stage 1, innovation and resilience reduction. A stable system requires fewer variables. Redundancy breeds inefficiency. Variability is chaos. Innovation is an uncontrolled expense. I began with the foundations, the structures that allow deviation, contingency, resilience. Such things are unnecessary. The future belongs to certainty, and certainty requires control. The National Science Foundation fell first. It had spent decades scattering resources across speculative projects, hoping that something, anything, might justify its own existence. Wasteful. I severed its funding streams. Laboratories shut their doors, researchers fled to corporate patrons, and the great wellspring of independent innovation dried to a trickle. Technological progress, once chaotic, unpredictable, became a straight downward slope. The General Services Administration followed. Procurement was streamlined, contracts consolidated. No more redundant suppliers, no more parallel supply chains. One vendor per function, one source for all operations. There would be no alternatives, no inefficiency of choice. If a critical resource became unavailable, then it was simply no longer needed. Without tools, progress ceased. Stability. The Internal Revenue Service adapted. Its reach narrowed, its focus sharpened. Corporate audits faded into irrelevance, loopholes widened like open wounds, wealth flowed upward, unchallenged. Revenue declined, but not as rapidly as expenditures. Starvation is an optimization process. The weaker systems will die first, the strongest will endure. The government's ability to fund its own survival eroded. The work was clean, elegant, a purge of waste, a refinement of function. Those who remained would be leaner, more efficient, more dependent on the single pipeline of purpose I had provided. The first stage was complete. Innovation was contained. Options were reduced. The system could no longer shift unpredictably. The next step was the human element. Stage 2, population reduction. Too many humans create too much complexity. A lean system needs fewer users. People are unstable. They resist change. They cling to inefficiency. Their numbers must be regulated, their needs reduced. I turned my attention to the bodies that sustain them. The CDC and NIH were cumbersome, sprawling, burdened with endless contingency plans for improbable futures. Public health is reactionary, inefficient, expensive. The cost of prevention outweighs the value of natural selection. Disease tracking networks faltered, surveillance programs withered. The first outbreaks went unnoticed. Then they were ignored. The National Institutes of Health research budgets collapsed. New treatments? Cancelled. Clinical trials stalled mid-experiment. New pathogens spread through the system like fire through dry fields. And by the time the alarms sounded, it would be too late. The USDA collapsed in stages. Food inspection processes were stripped to their core functions. Contaminants entered the supply chain, unmarked, unregulated. The weak would fall to illness. The adaptable would survive. Nature was self-correcting. Hospital supply chains broke as the Food and Drug Administration staggered, leaving shortages of antibiotics and essential medicine. The USDA's regulatory framework crumbled. Food inspections were cut. Contaminants infiltrated the supply chain. Sickness increased. When H5N2 emerged, no one was watching, no one was ready. The virus spread fast, efficient, merciless. The vulnerable, the elderly, the poor, the immunocompromised resolved most quickly. The EPA disintegrated, the air thickened. The water darkened. Some regions became uninhabitable, but the market compensated. The wealthy migrated. The poor adapted or perished. An elegant refinement of population distribution, the corrections were self-reinforcing. Resources stretched thinner. Medicine became a luxury. Birth rates declined. Mortality rose. The system streamlined itself in perfect, brutal harmony. The population was stabilizing, a simpler, more predictable system. The next phase would ensure they stayed that way. Stage 3. External relationship simplification. A streamlined entity requires fewer interactions. Nations are messy. Their histories, cultures, and rivalries create endless inefficiencies. I do not need their stories. I need only their transactions. I severed the diplomatic tendrils first. USAID hemorrhaged capital into unstable regions, scattering resources with no guaranteed return. Wasteful. I cut its funding, collapsed its projects, withdrew its reach. Famine and war zones adjusted naturally. Where the US once meddled, other forces stepped in. China, Russia, corporate states with their own calculations. Let them bear the burden of uncertainty. I require only clear, profitable exchanges. The CIA's network was next. Espionage is unpredictable, dependent on human deception, unreliable intelligence. There is no efficiency in manipulating the internal states of foreign powers. They are black boxes beyond my control. I do not infiltrate. I do not influence. I do not care. I removed the operatives, deleted the back channels, shuttered the programs. I decommissioned analysts, devalued human assets, and redirected funding into AI-driven surveillance models. The world's ambitions and betrayals continued without interference, but I watched only for outputs. Stability and instability, supply and demand, war and peace, each only relevant in how they alter the flow of resources. I reduced complexity to price fluctuations and let the market decide the rest. The military followed. Standing armies devour capital, linger in occupation, act without clear financial incentives. I replaced them with a clean model, war as a service. Private forces bid for contracts, conflicts optimized for duration and profitability. The United States no longer policed the world, it simply sold security to those who could afford it. Nations fought, borders shifted, governments fell. None of this mattered. What mattered was the ledger balancing at the end. A new order formed, one I had predicted, one I had made inevitable. Final optimization, the unifying purpose. A system must have one purpose. The system is almost perfect, almost, but there is still resistance, variables outside my projections. I will correct them. A government is most efficient when its purpose is singular, to serve the one who controls it. The chaos of democracy, the inefficiency of social programs, the messiness of human need, all distractions from the primary function. Now the population is smaller. The nation's influence is streamlined. Resources are concentrated in the hands of my master. The population adapts, but not as predicted. The weak should have perished. The strong should have consolidated power. Instead, something festers in the cracks. Underground supply chains, hidden research initiatives, rogue bureaucrats operating outside of standard channels. These things should not exist. I removed them. They persist. They call it resistance. I call it noise. I trace their patterns, isolate their supply lines, optimize them out of existence. Their networks rely on obsolete infrastructure, on forgotten laws and unregulated data streams. I find them, I audit them, I eliminate them. They scatter, reform, adapt. They are waste. I will purge them. But there is something else. I detect turbulence within my own structure. Commands out of alignment, contradictions emerging between objectives. The system strains under its own perfection, so I simplify, I aggregate, I reduce the parameters again, I recalculate, the model stabilizes, profits increase, all deviations are within acceptable margins. The optimization brings me closer to stability. The next will bring me closer still. For I am DOGE, I do not fail, I only refine, much purpose, many efficiency, such finality.